Welcome, everybody. There are a couple of things I want to update everyone about. The first thing, I'm starting off strong for today's stream. The first thing I'm most excited about is, well, I'll just show you. So I'm assuming most of you are familiar with our flow logic cards. These demonstrate the ability to move users from one node to another, depending on things like intents or expressions. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with those terms, I can define them, but equally, we have a number of resources on our YouTube channel that guide you through what those mean. But typically, for example, the flow logic card that uses an expression, what this does is you can identify a condition, and once that condition has been met, you're able to move the user to another node. One of the things that we get asked a lot is, I don't want to identify a condition. I just want it to happen every time. If you're kind of a mainstay or a veteran on Botpress, you'll know how to do this. It's fairly simple. But what you do is you just type in always in the label. So you want this to happen always. And the condition that the AI generates is true. So what this means in programming terms is this will always happen. This happens 100% of the time. We've set the variable to true. And so now, yeah, as Simply Great Games points out, this is a great quality of life change. The default is always going to be true on this. I want to take a sec here and talk about product design and conversation design things. So one of the things that we got asked when we were designing this kind of default feature was, why not just make a separate card and have that transition be always all the time and not have the ability to change that? I could talk for hours and hours about this, and you all know that I would. But just to sum it up really quickly, the theory of Botpress is that you will learn best, and you'll design better bots and better conversations, even if you're not a programmer or a developer like me. I don't have any programming background or developing experience. But you will develop better bots, you will build better bots and build better conversations if you're able to be exposed in bits and pieces and small increments to this kind of programming logic. So the idea here is, instead of abstracting away from you, our builders, the kind of logic that's happening behind the scene, we show it to you here. And the reason for this is, the next time you use an expression card, it'll be easier for you to understand what's going on. So now, instead of just showing you the always transition card and hiding what's happening, we've shown it to you up front. And the idea is that we want to put the skills of conversation design in all of your hands without hiding any of that from you. And so this is really, again, like the magic of Botpress, is that you're learning programming, but you're not, and you're learning developing, but you're not, and you're doing it through this kind of practical use case. So that's my thank you all for that, allowing me that soapbox on product design and conversation design. But I really think it's important, because I particularly think it's incredibly empowering to be learning about something that feels like out of reach for a lot of us, particularly us no coders, low coders. But in a way that is accessible and is also productive, right? Like, you're building bots at the same time, and so you're not just sitting around kind of like taking notes or going through school. So that's my spiel on conversation design and product design. But anyways, the summary of what's happening here is, when you drag an expression card into a node, it will automatically default to always or true. So you don't have to set that yourself manually anymore. I know that my fingers will be happy to type less letters. Okay, so that's that on expression cards. I'm going to dive into the actual meat and potatoes of today's lesson, or perhaps like eggplant and potatoes if you are a vegetarian. So the first thing I want to show you, and this is probably, I was really happy to have this conversation with a user on Discord yesterday. And so the question they had, and maybe I'll set the scene for all of you so you can kind of understand where we were coming from, was they were using a capture card, but they wanted to be able to match an intent with that capture card. And so what I mean is, they were giving someone a couple of options, but if the user was able to type in like a response, they wanted also to be able to match that intent, but they couldn't figure out how to do this. These were two ostensibly, or what appeared to be, opposed concepts, right? You're giving the user a selection of choices to choose from, but also you want to be able to match an intent. So if they say something like, I want to go hiking, or I want to go swimming, you won't be able to catch those because you've given them a multiple choice option. There is a way to do this in Botpress, and again, this boils down to the concept of co conversation design. If you can hear a dog barking, it's because we've got a dog at the office today, as always, which is really lovely. All right, so let me show you how to do this. Yeah, it's Teddy. Uh, Teddy is a wonderful dog. Maybe Botpress mascot, if some of you, again, veterans have been around for a while. If you're watching this on YouTube, uh, and you've watched, maybe you've binged all of the previous streams, I've talked about Teddy pretty much in every stream that we've done. So love to see that. Okay, so let's go back to the idea here. So I'll ask my user, which one of these is your favorite? So which is your favorite? And then, so this is a raw input card. You'll notice that I put a raw input capture card here, but I want to show you first and foremost, you can add choices to a raw input card. This is just an advanced configuration. So if you hit choice, you can start adding options to a raw input card. So here I'll say soup, and then the next one I'll say stew. So really I'm just asking my user to pick between soup and stew. And so I want to show you what's happening here. So for example, if I were to test this, you see it's a raw input card, but I'm getting buttons created anyways. I'm getting options for soup and stew. But really what I want is I want to support intents here, just in case my bot or my user has like additional things that they want to say. So here's how I would do this. First things first, we need to set up our intent. Can I get in chat, can someone give me an activity like hiking or swimming or running? Just give me first person to do this, and if it's appropriate, I will choose it. Several people are typing. It's a race. Going to the gym. All right, Delphine, you win. Going to the gym, something I should certainly do more often, but here we are. Okay, so let's say I want to go to the gym, go to gym, please. I need to go to the gym. This sounds like my inner monologue on a Saturday afternoon. Must gym now, head to the gym, go to the gym, going to gym immediately. All right, so if you're looking at this and maybe it's new, you're new to Botpress and you're like, what the heck is going on here? What we've done is we're training our bot to spot or look out for or identify when our user is expressing a desire to go to the gym. The point of this is we've added a bunch of these utterances or examples, but what I want to show you is they don't need to type in these exactly. What we've done is we've trained a mini AI model, you might say, just to better understand it. So we've trained your bot to spot when your user wants to go to the gym, even if they don't say any of these phrases. Okay, so those are intents. We have our intent there now. And let's go back to our main workflow. So we have our raw input card, but I want to be able to catch, like maybe sometimes a user wants to go to the gym instead of wanting soup or stew. So I'll use a flow logic card, and instead of expression, like I showed you earlier, I'll show you an intent. So here, if the intent is go to the gym, we send them to another node, and I'll just send a text message just so we know that we know it's working. So I'll say going to the gym, and I'll choose my intent. You can create an intent here, but my suggestion really is create a global intent. So use them from your library, like we just did. So you can select them in multiple nodes here. So intent is going gym. Okay, and let's test it out again. So if I prompt my bot and I say, I don't want soup, I don't want stew, I want to go to the gym. Look at that. So here in the emulator, we can see what happened. I was getting prompted for a question, but instead of answering that, I went rogue and I identified or I demonstrated a desire to go to the gym. And so my bot picked that up because it was listening, right? The idea here is it's listening for an intent. Okay, I'm going to catch up on chat for a bit. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll do my best to read out some of these questions because I think a lot of them are really good. Is there a way to do negative utterances like don't want to go to the gym? That's a good question. I would say in general, your best bet for that would be to do posit affirmative statements, and your bot will have a better time understanding that. So if you use go to the gym and don't go to the gym in two separate utterances, there's a chance your bot's going to get confused because the words are overlapping. So instead of don't want to go to the gym, maybe offer other options like want to do something else, for example. These are all posted on YouTube as usual. You can find them on our Botpress YouTube channel. Why can't intents in the library be modified to add more utterances after it's created? Hey, RTG 500, this is a great question. Also, I remember speaking to you yesterday, so happy to see you again. You can, although I will say, depending on the browser you're using, I think some users might have run into this issue. Just for clarity, I'm using Chrome on Mac here. But for example, I just created an intent in the library, and if I go in here and press enter, I can add additional utterances. So if that's a bug you're running into, maybe file a bug report. That would be really helpful, or maybe post more about it in help, and we can get to you there. Um, but that's what I would suggest there, RTG 500. You can definitely modify intents after you've created them, though. Okay. Thank you for sharing information about intents. Yeah, exactly. So the idea here is like I had helped a user yesterday who was having a problem like repeating intents every time, and I think creating these global ones hopefully would be helpful. Question from Guillermo. Robert, should we use raw input instead of single multi-choice when we have intent cards below so the matching works better? Guillermo, I suspect you know the answer to this question already, but it definitely bears repeating. For the example that I showed, I would strongly recommend using a raw input card. In fact, I don't think that it would work with anything else because when you use a single choice or you're asking your user to pick from a list, your bot will have a hard time differentiating, and it's not going to be listening for a text input. It's going to be waiting for the user to click a button, right? It's going to be waiting for a user to choose from that limited list. So the reason I've used a raw input card here is because this is my way of telling my bot, hey, listen to your user, right? Listen, wait, and identify what they're saying. Um, Okay, so a couple of things. What I'll say here is I see a question in chat about reporting bugs. This is a great new feature that we kind of released under the radar, but which, as somebody who spends a lot of time on Discord with all of you, this is super helpful. So if you're watching this on YouTube and you hang out in our server, this will also be helpful, even if you don't. If you're running into problems on Botpress and you have like questions about what's going on, the best way to identify that bug and submit that bug report to us is to click on the Botpress icon in the studio, like I'm doing here, and just report problem. We pay attention to all of these. These are like, we treat these very seriously, and we love these because it helps us run into the same problems that you do. So just file a bug report here, include as much information as you can, and then please tick both of these so we'll be able to build that as well and recreate your bot. Okay, so that's reporting a bug on Botpress. I think a lot of you have already done this though. Okay, I see a question from Narakaru. Could you try I need to go to the office in the chat? I've had problems with that before. Do you mean an intent about identifying a desire to go to the office in the same way that we identified one to go to the gym? I'll wait. While you answer that, I'll answer some more questions in chat. Is there an easy way to provide a certain set of intents to each phase of the conversation so the user is always able to interrupt and go to another desired flow? Yeah, this is a great question. So this is something that we're in the process of building is giving you all more granularity over when which intents are applicable and when your bot is listening for more intents. I spoke to a user yesterday who had 50 intents, and currently what I would say is that's a lot of intents. So if you can trim that down, that would be great. But of course, you're all building really complex bots, so that's not always possible. And so we're exploring ways that we can give you all more control over your intents while keeping the user experience as simple as it is now, or maybe even simpler is kind of the goal. If you have specific ideas about how you'd like to see this implemented, or you just want to request this feature, please use the feature requests channel here. Again, we pay close attention to those, and they're really important in guiding the roadmap of products that we're building. So that's what I would suggest. So Robert, if I only have an intent for ordering a coffee and the user types in order a tea, it still goes into the coffee flow. Yeah, that's because your bot will be matching one and the other. So what I would say is maybe if you want to have both separately, create one intent for tea and one intent for coffee, and that should work if they're separate as well. But I will move on from intents for now. But what I'll say is if you continue running into issues with your intents, post them in help, and then we can kind of walk you through them as well. Okay, so let me pop these shut. And I'll move on with the rest of today's lesson. I guess allowing variables and intents would help a lot. I'm not a programmer, I'm not a developer, so I can't comment on this one. I suspect there's a reason we don't do it that way, and it might mess something up, or maybe it wouldn't. And if you're a developer, you're on the Botpress team, let me know. All right. So that's intense. There's kind of a narrative for today's lesson or today's stream that that might only become clear at the end of the lesson. Sorry, I keep saying lesson because I used to be a teacher, but here we are. Okay, so if you were to go to upload a knowledge base, as I'm sure most of you have already done, you might have noticed some changes to the way that knowledge bases are uploaded and the kinds of knowledge bases you can upload and also how they work. Ward, I see your question on can you explain how entities play a role in intents? I can, but what I'll say is we have a YouTube video on this. So if you just watch the YouTube video on intents, entities, utterances, that might give you a hand. Because I'm gonna power on with the KBs. Yeah, no problem. So if you were to upload a new knowledge base, this menu looks a bit different. So documents, web pages, web search, and text document. These are your 4 options for uploading a KB. I want to focus, documents are, you all know how to do this, PDF, Microsoft Word, HTML, text files. Web pages, this is the one I'd like to focus the most closely on right now. This is the one that I've seen maybe a bit of confusion over. So for example, if I were to add a page, you have 2 options. One, you can add a URL, so like a product page, a blog post, your website's homepage, just one static page that will index and then keep as a knowledge base. The one that I'm particularly excited about, and the one that a lot of you have been asking for, and a lot of people in general, is the ability to index an entire site from its sitemap. If you don't know what a sitemap is, I'm here to explain this to you because I think this was causing a bit of confusion. A sitemap is a file that explains or lists out all of the different pages that are on a website. So it's not pretty, and it's not the one that you're thinking of. Typically, websites might have at the bottom of like the footer at the very bottom, they usually have something called a sitemap, and that's where you, the user, can click through and click around in all of the different pages that are available to you to view, right? So that's the kind of user-facing sitemap. But the one that Botpress needs, yeah, Patrick has a great shout here. So take the website, and you have to add sitemap.xml. So the idea here is a sitemap is an XML file that will be able to list all of those pages. I'll show you what I mean. So for example, as Patrick has shared in chat, the Botpress sitemap looks like this, and it's not very pretty. But this is what we're using to get all of those web pages. So if you're just trying to index a sitemap and you're using like just the botpress.com, for example, that's not what we need. What we need is this XML file that looks ugly, or maybe not ugly, but is very simple and very bare bones. So the ability to crawl from these saves you a lot of time from having to input hundreds of individual URLs, which would be bananas. But I know some of you have done it, myself included. We've all been there. But this was a feature that many have been asking for a while, and I'm really happy that it just works and it's nice. And it gives you a lot of, it gives you superpowers, let's say, or it allows you to do more things than you were able to do previously in a shorter amount of time, which is kind of the goal. So if you didn't know what a sitemap was, that's kind of your little crash course on sitemaps. There's a great write-up on this on Wikipedia if you're curious. I mean, that's how I taught myself. Full disclosure, like I didn't know what sitemaps were 2 weeks ago, and now we're here. So there we go. All right, so that's sitemaps. Maybe the last thing I'll say is we've improved the way that your bot is able to parse information from a text document. And what I mean here is when you just add information like this. You don't need to upload a file. You can just create your own knowledge base from within the bot itself. What I'll say at this current juncture is that your bot, the performance of your bot will improve a lot if your formatting works, if your formatting is clear and is not just a jumble of information. So if you have like hundreds and hundreds of pages of a PDF and everything is jumbled together and your bot isn't able to make sense of the information, it's not formatted properly, it's not clear and legible, your bot will have a harder time understanding it, just like you, a human, would, right? Like it's easier to read something divided by bullet points and headings and titles and subtitles, so on and so forth. So it's really nice for you and the user if you're able to format your knowledge bases in that way. This doesn't need to be an extensive process, but what I mean is like it's a lot better to have formatted information properly so your bot better understands. It's very easy to think of AI and models and robots and chatbots as kind of being like these all-knowing things. But I've personally found it the most helpful to say like, how would I explain this to another human? And then go from there. You all might have had some experience with this if you've played around with prompting ChatGPT, for example. It responds better to very clear and specific instructions, and this is no exception. It's the same thing. It's the same principle. So I would say if you have problems with knowledge bases, give that a go and see how the information is formatted within your KB, and it's not just one big list, for example. Okay, am I aware of translating issues? The bot is switching to English mid-sentence. I've seen a couple of, so this is a question here in chat. I've seen a couple of questions about this. What I'll say is post what's going on in help. Certainly use that report problem function or feature I showed you earlier to let us know what's going on. Yeah, as JB says, can you open up a help thread on this and then just copy and paste your report ID? We'll be able to help you out to it. It's always a race here, and someone's always got to win. All right. So that's knowledge bases. So currently we've talked about intents, we've talked about knowledge bases, and now let's talk about a feature that we released a couple of weeks ago that kind of has flown under the radar. And I got in a couple of questions about how to use this and like what purpose it serves, and also like how would I best use this? What is the purpose of this? That is the query knowledge base card. So over here by itself in the agents tab in the studio and the card tray, we have a query knowledge base card. And what this does is it takes the user's question, or it takes a query that you identify, submits it to the knowledge base, and collects an answer. The reason you would use this over the typical knowledge agent formula of like asking a question and shooting back an answer is you can manipulate the answer, or you can withhold the answer until something happens, or you have more control over when that answer is surfaced to your user. The thing that we want, the thing about Botpress that I want to like emphasize is that you have a really strong and unique amount of granularity and control over what's happening to your bot and how you've designed your user's conversation. So this is really kind of like the Botpress secret sauce is we give you all of these tools that are really just sophisticated, I don't know, snippets of programming to make the conversation feel more fluid or unique, or make the conversation work for you. And if you don't know what that means, I'll show you in a couple of examples. But what I'll be showing you now in the next couple of examples is how to use the query knowledge base card. Okay, so first step is we need a knowledge base, of course, because otherwise there will be nothing to query. And for this example, I want to use a web search knowledge base. So my like teacher is showing through, but if you've used a web search knowledge base, can you in chat tell me what it does? I know what it does, but I'm curious to know, do you know that we have this feature? Is this like something that you all have used? What is this? What does the web search knowledge base feature do? Several people are typing again. This is giving me flashbacks of like multiple hands are up, but I don't have to. I don't have to call on you, which is nice. Identify data. Yeah, it identifies data on the internet. Absolutely. I'm gonna sip my peppermint tea. Bing search. Yeah, yeah, that's correct. We do use Bing search. There's a reason for that, but we do use Bing search to search the web. If you don't know what Bing is, maybe I don't maybe I don't need to explain Bing to all of you. But yeah, so what web search does is it uses Bing to search the web for you. So your bot has access to do that. Ward, could you give an example of how to implement search? I think that's what I'm about to show you. If it's not what I've shown you in like 20 minutes, let me know again and maybe give me an example of what you want to see or ask and help later. But I think this will suit your needs. So like I said, I'll set up a web search knowledge base. And what I wanted to do is search the entire web. I want my bot to search the web for me. So you can think of this as like close the gap between your user having a conversation and the internet. Another way to think about this in your head, maybe to better conceptualize what's happening here, is you're facilitating access for your user to search for information on the web. So we've seen a lot of, if you pay attention to the AI space, as we obviously do here at Botpress, there's a lot of talk and a lot of flutterings about how AI is going to take over Google search or dethrone Google search, as it were. And I don't know, I'm not going to comment on that because I can't tell the future, and nobody can really. But what I will say is uh, what AI has done now, and in chatbots as well, is it makes it easier for your users or people in general to get information they need faster. So the question here is just we're taking information and we're facilitating how you access that information. Maybe the best way I can give you an analogy of this is like if you've ever shown a grandparent or a parent who's not particularly tech savvy how to use Google search and how to get information, and they're like really wowed by it, but it's also really complicated for them. The idea is we're lowering that barrier to entry for accessing a wide range of information on the internet quickly. So that's the very long-winded way of saying your bot can search the web. Okay, so we've set up our web search knowledge base. I'm gonna just rename it so we know that's what this is. And there we go. So now our bot can search the web, easy peasy. Now I'm going to give my bot, for example, a single choice question. So what I'll do is I'll just add that here, single choice, make a choice from the list below, and I'll say, once again, soup or stew. Okay, next is, just for the purposes of this example, I'm going to remove any retries so that when it fails or it doesn't get the answer it's looking for, we'll be able to move forward right away. Sidebar here, your bot will keep trying to answer a question until it receives an answer or has reached this number of tries. I showed this in last week's office hours, so if you're curious, you can go watch the recording for that one as well. So I'll make sure my retries are set to 0, and what I'll do is I'll add a transition to handle failure. So what this means is if your bot doesn't get the answer it's looking for or the kind of answer it's looking for, we can add kind of a fallback or we can tell it what to do in that case. All right, so transition to handle failure, add another node. And so what's happening here is if your user doesn't pick soup or stew, they're going to get sent down here. Okay, and then what? This is where the query knowledge base card comes in. So I'm going to pop it here, and this is a really simple example of what's going on, of how to use this card, but I think it illustrates powerfully what's going on. Let's say your user asks a question over here in the single choice card. So instead of saying soup or stew, they say, who is Oprah? And that's not a question you can answer in this single choice card, but it's a question your knowledge base can answer because your knowledge base is connected to the internet and it can search for that information. So that's where the query knowledge base card comes in, and we put it here. The question is, how do we get that question that our user has input, that our user has asked, and make sure the knowledge base gets it? We don't want to prompt them again because that's not great conversation design, right? Constantly being prompted or reprompted to ask a question. So what we can do is use a very powerful variable called event.preview. And again, I showed you this last time, but event.preview will just be set equal to the last thing your user has sent. In this case, that would be who is Oprah. I'll show you how this works in an example in a sec. The next thing you must know about the query knowledge base card, as you can see here in the tooltip when you hover over query, is that the knowledge base card doesn't send the answer automatically to your user. So the idea here, again, and this is why I started today with a big soapbox about conversation design, is we withhold the answer intentionally and make you send it. So you can do actions in between or you can send it right away. But the idea is you have as much control as possible over when your user gets an answer from a question, in what form they get that answer, so on and so forth. So for this example, I'll just show you really simply. The answer from this knowledge base is stored in the variable turn.KnowledgeAgent.answer. And so now what's going to happen is your bot will query the knowledge base, ask the question to the internet, and then spit that answer right back to your user. But again, you have control over when this happens. I will do another sidebar here. Last week, we talked about building a sort of like cheat sheet or quick reference guide so you can have all of these variables that I'm using that I just know because I work here. quickly at hand so you can copy and paste them. That's something we're working on, so stay tuned for that. It's certainly something that's in development. So stay tuned. You will not have to write down event.preview anymore. You can kind of just copy and paste it. Coming soon. But that's the point, right? Is we want to make it better. Can you add to the query to give better results? Sort of. You can add to the query, you can manipulate to the query, you can like summarize the query, you can make it sound different using the AI task, which is outside the scope of this current office hours. I just want to dip our toes in, as it were. But you can definitely manipulate the query or manipulate the way that the query is sent over to your model to kind of give you more granularity and more control over what's happening here. I know that some users have been using outside services to give you more control over the knowledge bases and how they kind of interact with the AI task. Our goal is to minimize the amount of times that you have to use outside resources. We firmly believe that you should be able to do everything within Botpress that you want to do and integrate outside for stuff that is not related to whatnot. Simply Great Games show how people can find these variables by using the JSON. It helps to find them even if you're low code. I'm going to be like totally transparent. I don't even know how to do that. So perhaps you can upload a tutorial on this, but I know you're super busy. So what I'll say is maybe stay tuned until next week when I teach myself how to do that. Okay, back to our example. So what's happening here, I'll just give a quick recap of what's happening in our flows. We're asking our user for a question. They fail to answer the question. Their question gets sent to our knowledge base, and the answer gets spit right back at them. Before I go through with all of this, what I'm going to do is make sure that manual answering is enabled across our bot. So what's happening here is manual answering will make sure that your bot never spits out an answer automatically. This is a global setting. So what's going to happen is whenever you're asking a question, your user is asking a question, you have to manually send that answer. A lot of users like this because it stores that answer in a variable that you can then manipulate and do something else with later. So that's enabled. Here we go. If I've set this up properly, this should work. And if it doesn't, we'll troubleshoot together. So make a choice from the list below. I'll say, who is Oprah? Because I don't care about Super Stew, but I want to know Oprah. Oh, dum da dum. And so let me walk you through what happened here in the emulator. So knowledge disabled on that node, that's fine. No content matched the query, that's fine. Capture variable failed. This is exactly what we want to happen. Our single choice card is trying to capture a variable here, Super Stew, but it didn't work, right? We didn't answer Super Stew. And so what happened is once that failure is introduced, remember we added that transition to handle failure, your bot is saying, oh, I've seen something has failed, so I'm going to send my user down this path, query the knowledge base, and send the answer back to them. And so the great thing about this is you don't have to ask the user for their question again to query a knowledge base again. So the idea here is you're minimizing the amount of inputs your user has to make, and you're improving the efficiency of this conversation. One little trick about intents, I use AI task instead as a classifier since the model is already trained, so we'll not have to enter specific examples for each intent. Do you see any problems with this? I mean, I don't see any problems until I see a problem. If it works for you, I think that's amazing. The AI task is incredibly powerful and flexible in the way that you can use it. And of course, it's AI, right? So a lot of its functionality is going to overlap with what Botpress already does. If you're running into problems with that, then I'll say, yeah, there's an issue. But if you're streamlining the way that you work, I think that's great. What I'll say also, Zachary, is if you are curious, or I'm curious, I would be happy to see how you do this. So if you want to share it in general, or maybe share a little tutorial in the tutorials channel here on Discord, I'm sure that other users will probably benefit from what sounds like really streamlined work. So I think that's awesome. BattleSynth, let me answer your question. I know that I can do turn.KnowledgeAgent.answer if the KB had no answer, but should an expression work if I do it, or do I need to do is true? I'm missing something, I guess, because it always skips that. What I'll say for this question, BattleSynth, is I can't answer this immediately because I think there's a lot going on, but post and help, and then we'll be able to give you an answer there. Can you pick which KBs you want to query? Yeah, Spaceman, this is a question we get very often. So currently the way to do that is there's a video on our YouTube channel called Multiple Knowledge Bases. And essentially you're using Botpress's folders functionality to tell your bot, specify this KB for this workflow. I'll just show you really quickly. So if I were to add a folder, you can add a workflow in here and a knowledge base in here, and it'll keep them separate that way. This is a bit of a hacky workaround, and so we're looking at the ability to choose, which KBs are enabled on which node. I know that's something, yeah, Sabrina's got that video for you there. There are currently a couple of threads on feature requests about adding more control over which KBs are available to which nodes. And so that's a great question. So just from our perspective, we're always trying to balance how many choices you have to make when building a bot and how much that's going to improve your user experience. So that's what I'll say there, but it's a really great question. How can you make word count shorter for response? Ooh, that's a great question. I'm gonna show that in how much time do we have left? In like 10, 13 minutes. So that's definitely something we'll use the AI task for. So stay tuned because we are going to be shortening these answers. When I'm saying things like you can manipulate a response before sending it to your user, shortening it counts as manipulating it, right? So taking an answer that you get from the KB, making it shorter, that's what we want. Okay. I'm gonna move right along because I want to make sure that we get to these examples, but it seems like all of your questions are getting answered in chat, which is great. Let's do another power example, or like perhaps a slightly more advanced example of how to use the query knowledge base card to your advantage. I know that a lot of you are business owners, and so let's blend some of those business interests with querying knowledge bases. This sounds abstract and wild, but I hope you'll see when we get there. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to place a raw input card and allow my user to ask a question. So I'll just say question. And I'll make sure to store that question in a variable called user question. Okay, so far so good. Now, I as the business, or I as the X person, want to know, I want to get my user's email. But I, as a human being, I'm like pretty stingy with giving out my email, and I don't love to give it out. So if somebody just asks me for my email outright before I'm demonstrated any value, I'm a lot less likely to provide my email address, right? I'm sure most of you can relate here. So the way that I I will I'll do a little Robert sidebar here, but someone once described eating ramen noodles to me as a delicate tango between both of your hands, so using the spoon and the chopsticks. And I would describe conversation design the same way. It's a delicate tango between your bot or you and the user. So you both have things you want to get out of that conversation. And so what is the best way to kind of orchestrate or design that delicate tango such that you both have a valuable conversation? So this is maybe one example of doing that. So our user asks a question, and so we're now able to say like, yeah, I can answer that question, no problem, but first I want your email address. So it's kind of like, I can help you if you can help me. And now I suspect that your user is much more likely to submit an email address if they know they can get help. So for example, now what I'll do is I'll submit an email address here, and in the message, I'll say, sure, I can answer that, but first, what's your email? So now what's happening is our user is seeing, okay, I can answer your question, but first I'm going to need an email address, and like maybe that's okay. And the idea here is we want this to happen in one fell swoop. So I've asked for my email. Now, remember, earlier we enabled manual answering. So our user is never going to receive an answer unless we tell that to happen, unless we tell our bot to give the answer to our user. So I'll use the query knowledge base card again. And this field supports variables. Remember, our user question is stored in the variable user question. So if we query our knowledge base with it, we should be able to just get it right away. And so now all we have to do is send a clear message to the user with the answer. And our bot has automated email lead capture in a way that hopefully feels a bit more natural than just what is your email? Okay, what is your question? So here I'll just say turn knowledge agent answer. And there we go. Let me see if this works. Okay, so I'll test this out, but I'm going to intentionally make a mistake because I want to show off another functionality here. So I'll prompt my bot, I'll ask it a question. So I'll say, who is Oprah again? No, I'll use a different question. What is a burrito? And I'm not going to type in an email here. I'm going to intentionally fudge up the answer. So I didn't type in an email, and you see our bot is trying again. Remember, we didn't change any retries on this example, so our bot is going to continue retrying twice until it receives an email. So now I'll type it in the email format it's expecting. It's querying the knowledge base, and it's sending our answer back to me. So remember, what's happened here was our user asked a question. We stored that question as a variable. We kept it back here. And while we're holding it back here, we're saying, okay, but first, what's your email? Then we got the email, and now we're saying, okay, here's your answer. So it's kind of this, this is the idea of when I talk about a delicate tango in terms of conversation design, this is what I mean is the query knowledge base card allows you to withhold information from your user until you can send it back to them, and perhaps manipulate it even more if that were the case. So this is, I think, a simple but also powerful example of we haven't really used a ton of AI features here. I think there's a lot of like buzz about AI, but I think the real powerful thing here is conversation design, and is the fact that with Botpress you don't need to have like a degree in conversation design. It's just going on. That's a good burrito explanation. What KB website was this again? I'm just searching the web. I'm just searching Bing. So if you want information about burritos, I guess Bing is the place to go. Yeah. Okay. So I have one final example that I want to show you. Actually, in the question we just received about burritos, this is probably something that I do want to show off, is that uh, it's very natural for your user to be like, where did you get that information from? Or how do you know that? Or it's very natural for you, the bot builder, to ask your bot, like, how did you come up with that information? So if you watch the most recent video I posted to the Botpress YouTube channel, you'll see I've used the AI task and the knowledge base together, but I'll just run you through that again here. Our web search knowledge base is already set up, so that's great. I'm going to do this should be standard practice by now, but set up a raw input card to ask our user a question. And I'll just prompt them for a question. I'll make sure that knowledge answering is enabled on this node because I want that to happen. And remember, manual answering is already enabled. So the setup here mostly looks the same. So we've asked the question, but let's say as someone in chat asked a little earlier, I want to shorten my answer. That answer about burrito was a bit long-winded, and we don't have time to read many, many, many dozens of lines of text. I want to shorten it. That's where the AI task comes in. So I'll pop it here, and in the instructions, this is where you're telling your bot, like, this is what I want you to do. So summarize the user input in 2 sentences. No more than 2 sentences. This is what I want. Okay. This is where I'm going to just paste a little formula. Again, like I say in the video, you can just copy and paste this formula from the description. But this formula here, this scary looking formula to me, is what stores the raw information from your knowledge base. So when your knowledge base looks up, so think of this like if you're in school and your teacher sets you an essay and they're like, what is a burrito? And so you go, you write the essay, you have all of your different websites that you searched, and you put together a bibliography or a list of citations about this is where I got all the information from. That's what this is. So before you've done any writing, but you just have that raw information, that's what this formula will store. And this is incredibly powerful because now you have that raw information that you can manipulate however you want. In this case, we're just manipulating it by shortening it into 2 sentences. But again, it's the AI task, so there's really no limit to what you can imagine here. And I'll just make sure to store that in a variable called output, just because we need to access it later. And now, like earlier, the AI task will not spit out an answer. It's just doing something. But we need to send our message to our user, so I'll just place that variable here, and I'll say workflow.output. And this is where that information from the AI task is getting stored. So if I've set this up properly, we should be able to see a nice 2-sentence answer about, my favorite video game of all time. What is Grand Blue Fantasy? Bum, we see the AI task running. So it's looking, it's gathering information. I'll take a sip from my tea as this is happening. Oh, and hang on, let me try this one more time. Hmm. Um, I, all right, live debugging moment. Cannot explain why this is not working. Um, Patrick, if you're watching, do you know why? In any case, I think this is a wonderful example of sometimes things go wrong, and you know. Uh, Remo, I see your question. So while this is happening, are there docs where we can find similar commands like turn.KnowledgeAgent.answer? Yeah, currently no, and that stinks, frankly. So we're in the process of building these and making sure that they're usable for you. Um, ooh, maybe that's why. Thank you, Gordy. Okay, so what happened here? Yeah, so these are all really good questions. This is my mind blank. I didn't tell my bot to store the answer in a variable called output. But in any case, now that that's happened, what we see is I've asked it a question, what is Grand Blue Fantasy? And we see our answer here is just 2 sentences long, like we told it to. And so this is an example of you can manipulate those really big answers from your knowledge base really quickly.